Mark, and I am very encouraged by this rally. I wish we could gather together in person. There's such an energy and love that we feel when we gather as a community. Many of us in Ridgefield have experienced it on the holiday stroll, on the Halloween walk, and I am hopeful that this is one of many gatherings where we can at some point be together in person and connected in that way. I have lived in Ridgefield for the last 11 years. I have practiced in this area for 15 years, and I am raising four half Sri Lankan American and half Puerto Rican children. Their ages are 6, 9, 11, and 13. And that was the hardest part of my talk, is to remember how old all of them are right now. And I have to say, I'm very grateful for this town. I am grateful to see how we've come together, how people truly want to act. I am grateful that we have initiatives dedicated to resilience and compassion. And what compassion is, according to Christopher Cook, who wrote The Compassionate Achiever, he came and spoke to us. He had one of the best definitions of compassion I've ever heard. He said, compassion is empathy plus action. And empathy is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to hear and to learn and to understand what they're going through. But it doesn't stop there. Then we must take action. And I believe as a town, it is time to take action. Just to give you a little background about myself, I grew up in Danbury. My family is still there. And then I went to a boarding school in Watertown, Connecticut. It was predominantly white. And essentially, aside from one day out of the year called Diversity Day, it was pretty much a colorblind experience. I realized that when I went to Mount Holyoke College, an all-women's college in Massachusetts, where I started to process that experience and how it affected me. Because although people may have been colorblind, I knew I was of color. I knew my experience was of color, and I experienced things differently. I then had the opportunity to complete my undergraduate and then graduate work at Columbia, where I had professors who actually marched with Martin Luther King, talk to me about their experiences, talk to me what it was like to be in the room with him. And I'm really encouraged, knowing the history, having spent time in this field, having lived my life as a person of color, to see the interest and the motivation that I'm seeing in Ridgefield and in our surrounding towns. It has given me a hope that's been different than any other time in my life from what I've seen, and that's encouraging. The one thing I do want to say, though, is that amidst all of this, amidst the motivation, amidst the conversations, there are many people who still believe that they should raise their kids colorblind. I have heard this in conversations, not directly to me, but as a therapist, I hear a lot of conversations. It's been said to other people who may have been safer to say this to than someone who looks like me, that people are still planning to raise their kids colorblind. They'd rather have them focus on kindness. People who believe that this situation is not about race. And let me just say, colorblindness does not celebrate difference. It is definitely motivated from a good place of kindness, but it does not celebrate difference, nor does it acknowledge the unique experience and struggle of people of color, all of which are integral to our identity. And if you're going to see us, you're going to see all of us, and all of that is included. So what I want to say, for those people who think this is not about race, that racism does not exist in our idyllic town, I'm going to tell you that it does. I'm going to tell you that I have experienced it in different ways. When people come to my house, which is a big house, and they're looking for the owner, assuming that I am working there. I've experienced it when I go shopping in stores, and I know that when I am not dressed as I'm dressed now, I'm going to be looked at differently. I may not be greeted as the person before me and after me who came in. I've experienced it through my husband, who is a white-skinned Puerto Rican orthopedic surgeon with the name Feliciano, when people automatically assume he's Italian because of implicit bias. The connection between orthopedic surgeon and Puerto Rican is not as easy to make as it is with an Italian. And unfortunately, I have experienced it in different ways with my kids. Not many as of yet, but I can recall to you an incident 3 years ago at one of the community pools that we joined where my son approached me, um, big, wide eyed, because he was playing in the pool with three boys who were blonde. And they were playing very nicely, shooting water guns. And all of a sudden, they looked at my son, who was very suntanned at that moment, my brown skinned son in July, and said to him, "No, you can't play this game. This is for white kids." And I remember the look on his face when he came to tell me that. I am grateful for my older daughter's kids, friends who ran to his defense, chasing down those little boys and talking to them about why that was wrong. So we have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. If you think about it, where did those kids learn that? It came from somewhere. I'm not saying that it came from their homes or from their parents, but it came from somewhere because it exists. We are influenced by the media, by our culture, by our conversations, and kids are the most impressionable in this way. You heard that kids are sponges. Well, they're sponges for everything. They are seeing and they are hearing, and they're taking the lead from us. We as parents are their role models. So we first, when we think about this conversation, how do I explain this to my kids? We have to start with us. We have to look internally. What are my thoughts? What are my biases? How much do I know? We really have to become informed and educated on our own, because you can't fight against something unless you know what it is you're fighting against. You're not going to know the breadth, the width, the history, and the power it has until you learn a little more about it. When I talk about this work, we often say, don't just talk about it, be about it. And being about it is hard. I can tell you from the conversations I've had with my white friends this week, and even what I've experienced myself, you are going to lose friends over this. You're going to have people who no longer want to engage in conversation with you, who no longer want to spend time with you, who are going to look at you, even though you are white and have white privilege, as different, because you want to have these hard conversations, which are draining for many people. It is not an easy road to be an ally. And many of us have walked it, but that is what it's going to take, because anti-racism can't just be about what you do. It has to be about who you are. And for many of us, really who we are becoming, because it is an evolving process in understanding and stepping into this role. People have had many different conversations this week with their kids. I've been encouraged by that. I've been encouraged by friends who are taking their kids to the memorial at the Lounsbury House and having the hard conversations. My conversations with our kids have sounded a little bit different, especially the ones with my son, who is 11 and darker skinned. Even though he has a father who looks white, he looks more like me. And the conversations I've been having with him have been hard. I have seen in his big brown eyes, his eyes look just like mine, but he has far better eyelashes, just the innocence slightly leaving, sadness, fear, questioning, the thought, is this going to happen to me? And even, why does this happen? As I talk about why he has to dress a certain way when he's in town, why he can't wear hoodies. We've even talked about what happens when he's old enough to drive, and how he's supposed to respond regardless of what he's done, because that's a narrative we have to instill in our children of color, especially our males, very young. I've talked about when his friends are running from the Prospector to 850, why he cannot run, because he never wants to make someone think that he's chasing them. The rules are different for him, even in a town like Ridgefield, even in a town that's committed to activism, because there are many things that shape the way that we think and essentially the way that we act at the end of it, even unknowingly. Racism unknowingly is still racism. It's still powerful. It still has the impact to shape our experiences, our community, and certainly affect people of color. Those were the conversations we were having this week. So what can we do? I would like you to start with a question, which can serve as a guideline for you. Start with the question, are we raising kids that can identify and acknowledge inequality and injustice, and kids that have the courage, the knowledge, the compassion and the desire to do something about it? Are these the kids we're raising in our home? Our kids essentially hold the hope of our future, but they're dependent on us. They're dependent on what we say to them, what we expose them to, what we do for them. How many times in my lifetime has the thought come into my head as an adult, oh, my mother said that. My mother told me about that. Because those thoughts, those experiences become ingrained in our hippocampus, and they're triggered as we go through life by different experiences that remind us of those words of wisdom or whatever those words may have been and the experiences we were in where we were taught by our parents. If we don't talk about it with our kids, we are going to leave them to draw their own conclusions. And I want to give you a brief example of how this happened in our home this week that I've talked about on my podcast and on Instagram with my 6-year-old Carolina. She has developed a passion for doing things for the poor. And I was wondering where this came out of. We've done some work as a family that is geared toward people in poverty, but we don't talk about it all that much. So I asked her, what made you think about this? And she said to me, I watched the movie Little Women, and they were doing these nice things for poor children. And I thought that was really nice, and I want to do that. And I said, okay, great, Carolina, we can do that. Carolina, what do poor people look like? And she said to me, well, they're dirty and they wear ripped clothes and their faces are dirty. And I said, Carolina, poor people can look just like us. They're clean. They can wear nice clothes. And she said, well, that's because we give them nice things. Her images were shaped by that movie. And those were images that could have been carried with her well down the line, decades, if we hadn't had the conversation. Kids are perceptive. They're taking everything in. And just to give you a little snapshot into what kids learn at different ages, I'm going to read you the statistic from this website called Pretty Good Design, and it has great information on it for you as parents. At 3 months old, babies look at faces of their caregivers mainly, and they search for other faces that match the races of their caregivers. At 2, they are looking at race to reason about people's behaviors. 2 years old. At 30 months, most kids look at race to choose their playmates. And at 4 to 5 years, racial expressions of prejudice peak in children. At 5 years old, that's kindergarten, they show that Black and Latinx kids show no preference to kids who they search for playmates, while white kids predominantly look for other kids, kids that look like them. And by kindergarten, kids show many of the same racial attitudes as adults in their culture. And they've already learned to associate with groups that have a higher status than others. I've seen this clearly in my child's kindergarten class when I volunteered there. Now, the hope is that between 5 and 7, we can have explicit conversations with our kids. And when we do that, the research shows that their attitudes and perceptions about race can change dramatically in a little as a week. So the time is now to have these conversations, regardless of how old your kids are, but especially at this young age. As I said, it starts with you as a parent, you becoming informed, learning, reading books, listens to podcasts, talking with other allies, discussing the materials that are available for you to learn. And then to have conversations with other people of color, to make friends with people who don't look like you. I recognize that that can be a challenge in this town, but we have to seek out groups where we can do that. We have to build trust across these cultural lines, because trust needs to be built for us to move forward on both sides. It starts with going to the memorials, reading books, watching movies as a family. There are many great books with people of color and that highlight their accomplishments. We just watched the Disney movie, Ruby Bridges, which is a great movie to watch with your kids to spark these conversations. And I think a big piece of this too are to engage in those conversations with your neighbors. Start in your own circles, bring up the topics, work with your schools to highlight people of color and their accomplishments, with your libraries to bring speakers. I think you can get the picture where I'm saying start with you, move on to your family, then your circles, and then your neighborhood. And if you want to engage in the work externally, in the communities, it's really important that you engage in the work that people of color have started, in the work that they're doing, because oftentimes we can act out of our passion, out of outrage, out of disbelief, and those actions can actually cause more harm than help, which eventually people of color have to clean up when you can step out of it and resume your normal life without some of these challenges. So that's why the building of bridges, the communications are really important. When you get to know families of color, when you go out to dinner with them, when you invite them into your home, when your kids develop relationship with kids of color, then they start to see them differently. And I'm sure that if those little boys in that pool had friends who look like Samuel, who they grew up with, they may never have said that because they would have humanized color. Even at that young age, we can humanize the experience of people of color for our kids. I just wanted to say that this has been a 400-year struggle. We are in midst of historical happenings right now, which have left me hopeful. I've never seen so many different diverse backgrounds come together to agree upon this and are looking for actions to move forward. This is a moment for our town to come together and engage in this conscientiously, compassionately, considerately, but proactively. We have an opportunity right now, but it's not going to happen in a couple weeks. We cannot slap a Band-Aid on this to feel good and then expect for this issue to go away. This is something that is a marathon, not a sprint, and we need everyone to make it to the finish line, especially our white allies, to champion this forward for us as well. Don't go too fast too soon. You will burn out. I have a little project I found as I was cleaning up. This is a hand, and my son made it in second grade. He's about to go to middle school. I'm sure he picked the color that most resembled his hand, not dark brown, not light brown, somewhere in the middle. And what he wrote on it was, "I have a dream that everyone will choose kind." And I have to say, I do too. It's going to make me a little emotional to talk about it. I hate getting emotional. Therapists do not like getting emotional in front of their people, but I do too. And I'm hopeful for that dream right now because the world knows it now. They know. It's one thing when you don't know, but when you know it, you can't turn away from it. And as adults, now that we know better, we need to do better. Our kids are counting on us, and we failed them in so many ways. We failed them in how we took care of the environment. We failed them in how we focused on achievement as a measure of worthiness and value as a culture. But this is one area that we can do right by them, and we need to do right by them. They are counting on us for this, and we have this opportunity to shape this generation so they will not experience in their lifetime what we are witnessing right now. So let's do this together, Ridgefield. Let's do it together. We can come together. We can work together. We can listen to each other and hear each other and act together. And we're doing it for ourselves, but we're doing it for our kids and the generations to come. We're doing it as a community of compassion. So thank you, Ridgefield. Thank you for listening. And I am here as well to be of support, to help educate. And I appreciate everyone's proactive involvement in this effort. Thank you.